Thank you, Jillian, and thank you for the introduction and for giving us the space as UNI Europa to share our points of views and basically, you know, our work. As Jillian was just mentioning, UNI Europa is part of a global union federation, UNI Global Union. We are present in 150 countries around the world. We represent 20 million workers in the private services sector, from ICTS to commerce. And at the European level, we have 272 national trade unions that are affiliated to us. So I just wanted to add to that, so you understand a little bit better our views and what we bring to this table. Now, in the next slide, if we can move, I think it is very important that when we talk about the importance of diversity, and particularly of gender inclusion in the workplace and in the tech sector, we start by analyzing the concept of gender. Now, gender, for the purposes of this presentation, we have to understand it as a set of characteristics that are socially constructed and learned. And we express them in terms of masculinity and femininity. And this is where the issues begin. As gender is shaped by cultural, economic, social, and historical factors, it creates what we know as gender stereotypes. It is a generalized view of characteristics of the roles that both women and men should have. And this ends up, of course, shaping our views, shaping our decisions, and shaping overall the way we perceive the world. Just as we were seeing, take the case of, you know, girls should be playing with dolls, or boys should be playing with football, or the fact that, you know, we perceive women as being more sensitive or more emotional, while men tend to be more rational. You see, all of this has an impact towards the decisions we make later in life. And it is what we see today in more broader terms, like gender segregation at work. Just take a closer look at those sectors which are more highly feminized, and you will see that, for example, they're in the care sector, you know, nurses, teachers, and those that are more masculine tend to be, for example, construction. So these already shape the way we perceive. Now, is gender stereotypes something that is usually visible? No. And if we can change to the next slide. Sometimes these stereotypes are not visible. Many types, they're automatic, unintentional, they're deeply ingrained, and they're able to influence our behavior. They become part of what is known as an unconscious bias. Now, in the workplace, this is widespread. It is recognized, it is unrecognized, and it goes through all stages, from the recruitment and retention to the promotion of women in the workplace. Now, they can be present in language, they can be present in behaviors, and they can be present in decisions. So some forms of unconscious biases that we have seen are, for example, the cases of names. Did you know, for example, according to statistics, that 74% of white applicants have been more successful in the application of a job than those that have a name that is considered to be part of an ethnic minority? The same goes with age, the same goes with gender. Now, these unconscious biases are deeply rooted. We don't see them, and that have an impact on the way women in tech. So if we change to the next slide, let's talk about women in tech and how these unconscious biases affect them. It can be in two main areas. It can be in the recruitment processes, but also in the retention of the potential of women in tech. Now, if we go to the next slide, in the recruitment processes, there's also two things that we need to take into consideration here: how women perceive the sector, but also how employers make the decisions, and those unconscious biases, how they affect those decisions. So the OECD, in a study, said that according to them, girls at the age of 15, when they were asked what careers they would choose, only 5% of them would choose careers in engineering and in technology, unlike boys. 18% of them would choose those careers. And if we go, for example, to the 2019 survey that was carried by the European Institution on Gender Equality on Women and Men in Tech, out of 1,000 female tertiary students, only 24 of them chose to go into tech studies. And out of those 24, only 6 would go into the digital sector. So there's clearly a perception of women that this, and I quote again, Ege, in this, is a men's playground. So we already have, in the process of applying for a job, we already have those stereotypes. But when it comes to the recruitment process, how is it present from the employers? Now, if you go to the next slide, I want to show you an example. What you see on the screen, there's 2 columns of adjectives, masculine and feminine. Now, if you look, these adjectives have been ascribed to each gender. Masculine being more active, ambitious, autonomous, driven, determined, and women being more emphatical, honest, considerate, compassionate, sensitive. You see, when a job advert is placed and we don't look into the language, we don't notice that they're already embedded a unconscious bias. And if you take a look at them, and if you're a person who is trying to go into the sector, you will find that many times these kinds of objectives can be deterring into the decision of whether applying to that job or not. I strongly suggest that whenever you have an application out for a position, that you take it through the lens of the filters that are currently available. There's lots of them available online, and you see what kind of language you're using. And if the language you're using is already a more inclusive language in itself. This is a form of an unconscious bias that is present already in the recruitment process from the side of the employers. So we've already talked about how it happens in the recruitment. Now let's take a case of what happens by the retention of the women in the sector. So if we take a next slide, I would like to ask all of you if you can go into the chat box and write in the chat box the reasons why or the challenges that you think are the biggest for the women currently in the sector. So please go ahead, write on the chat box directly, which challenges do you think are the biggest for the women in the sector currently ongoing? I'm just going to give you a few seconds. Yes, directly in the chat box. So I would really appreciate that. That way we can see being paid, what they're worth. Thank you. Career progress, payment. Not being addressed directly, even if they're an expert. Men's views are giving precedence, upskill, opportunities for promotion, confidence, being seen as equal, keep women updated, unattractive culture in higher management, stretch tax, attractive men approach first for opportunities, not having the same opportunities. Well, let me show you the next slide. Last year, too political. That's interesting. And down in her competency, confidence to require the same salaries as men. Yes. Now, if we can change to the next slide. Last year, we held a workshop with our European affiliates working with women in tech. This is an issue that is very important to us, as ICTS is a big sector for us. And we also discovered some of the things that you have mentioned in the chat box. You know, lack of support for women, such as, you know, mentoring programs, too much pressure on women leaders to take up even those roles as mentors, lack of work-life balance, unequal pay, fewer opportunities for upskilling, lack of transparency in hiring and promotion processes, and sexual harassment. Now, this last part of sexual harassment is very important. And these issues, just like the ones you put in the chat box and the ones that you see currently on the screen, have an impact on the retention of women in the field. Women already have passed the first hurdle, which was the recruitment process. But now they go into this workplace that is not, you know, containing them, that is not holding them, that is not supporting them. So what do we do? What can we do? Now, if we go to the next slide, Let me show you some examples of the work that we are currently carrying out as unions to support the women that are in the tech sectors. So next slide, please. As unions and as UNI Europa, we have been working on the different levels that you see, from raising awareness to mentoring programs. All of these issues are important in the way that we keep and support the workers throughout the sector. Now, the first one, which is raising awareness, and it's in the next slide, is basically the beginning. By raising awareness, you start to understand the problem. Now, what you see on the screen is an example of the campaign that we have been carrying out on the terms of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is a deeply ingrained issue in the ICT sector, unfortunately, because it is seen as a bro-centric culture, as they call it. If you recall, in 2018, there was a big Google walkout as a cause of sexual harassment. What was the response by the big companies? It was actually to give money to the people that were denounced on sexual harassment to keep quiet or to retire quietly. It wasn't about changing the culture. It was about to keep silent. So what this causes, it's still poisonous. It's still maintaining this culture, which is toxic environment. And you know what happens with sexual harassment? What happens is that we see women having low productivity, low self-esteem. We see violence that becomes anxiety, stress, and in the end, who wants to work in a workplace where all you can feel is being harassed or that you're feeling violated, either by words or by actions? So raising awareness for us is key. By understanding the initial concepts, we cannot start to understand the problem. And this is the first step for us to be able to find solutions. Raising awareness, like you see on the screen, we have done it on sexual harassment. We do it on equal pay. We do it on a various number of issues. And it is important for our unions to understand these problems so that they can, through collective bargaining, include it in their agreements with the employers and be able to protect effectively the workers. Now, on the next slide, gender mainstreaming. And why is gender mainstreaming so important? Well, here I want to take you to an example that was shared by Carolyn Criado Perez in her book, Invisible Women. She wrote, and it's a fantastic book and I strongly recommend it because it has tons of data about the importance of having a gender lens. Now, take the case of public restrooms. Public restrooms, usually when they're designed, they're 50-50. You have 50% of spaces allocated to men, 50% of spaces allocated to women, because this is natural, this is, fair, this is equal. But if you put on the gender lens, you will notice that this shouldn't be the case. Why? For the same amount of space, men actually have more chances of relieving themselves. Not only do they have the same amount of stalls as women, but they also have urinals. So basically, they have more space. Second, if you think that the largest population of elderly and disabled are women, if you add to that many women could use the toilets with children, you also add to that women, when pregnant, have less of a bladder capacity. And to that, you add that 20 to 25% of all female population in a reproductive age can be menstruating. Then you start to understand that by using a gender lens, we really see things from a very different perspective. It's not just about what's equal. It's about equal in a different way. It's about what needs to be done to bring that. So by putting on that gender lens, by making sure that women are included in the decision-making process, that they're included in the negotiation process, we can really start to change things up and create workplaces that are more equal and diverse. And it's only that way that we can bring in more women into the sector. Now, on the next slide. So we've already talked about gender mainstreaming. We've talked about raising awareness, but we also have that issue, which is work-life balance. And it has been deeply impacted by what's happening currently today in the world. As you have seen, the COVID pandemic has basically 80% of the population teleworking. Have you found it to be easy? Has this been meaning that you put in less hours? That's the issue. You see, for women already, there has been a very unequal distribution of household chores. If you add to that equation that women are working from home, that they're taking care of childcare responsibilities and household chores, we, from the union side, have been seeing that many women have more than doubled their amount of work. Many times they put additional hours at night time just to be able to respond to the responsibilities of work. So this already puts additional stress and overload of an overhead work on women, and it makes it very difficult for them to continue their work. What you see on the screen is actually a campaign that we carried out at UNI Europe in 2015 to save the maternity leave directive. As you probably are aware, the maternity leave directive was not passed. It was actually changed and transformed into what is known today as the work-life balance directive. And it was included, it was actually adopted in August 2019. These kind of instruments, of legal instruments, are instruments that we as unions are also pushing for because we understand the value of having them in place. Through legislations, it is also better to include, for us, to be able to include them through collective agreements and to negotiate with the employers to make sure that everything that is written also comes into full practice. Now, in the next slide, I want to show you some further examples of policy making. You know, many of you have said about the gender pay gap. Well, here what you see is a campaign that we're currently carrying out with ETUC on ending the secrecy and pay transparency. And we have also worked with other global union federations in terms of having the ILO adopt the Convention on Eliminating Workplace Violence. This is a huge instrument that I strongly suggest that you look into it because it's one of a kind and it brings employers, employees, and organizations into it. Now, on a final note, and if we can change the slide, one of our biggest works today is actually mentoring women. We have a program that was established in 2013. 700 women across 49 countries are working in this program as a way to build their self-confidence, to build their skills through job shadowing. It's an incredibly successful program, and I'm happy to announce that we are having next year our first pilot program for women in STEM careers in Argentina and Brazil. And with this, I would just like to close by saying that gender diversity, without gender diversity, you will be walking through life with one eye shut. You wouldn't be able to see both sides of the road. When you bring diversity into the workplace, you're able to see the whole panorama. And it is key to involve women in all stages of the decisions that are being made. It is only then that you will understand the needs of women. So with this, I want to thank you all again for giving us this opportunity in this space, and happy to share more information with you. Thank you.